How can religious and spiritual people profess to be apolitical when capitalism is binding all people across the globe in a worldview that is completely incompatible with the values that you profess to care about? How can spiritual and religious people preach cultivating inner peace and kindness and love, but at the same time be completely accepting a system that is destroying our planet and the cause of the indescribable anguish of billions of the fellow beings with whom we share this earth? How can spiritual and religious people just simply sit back and watch as their worldview, their belief system, their faith is co-opted by capitalism to a worldview that doesn't care about humanity? If spiritual and religious people are serious about upholding their values, they must at the very least acknowledge the fact that capitalism is the root cause of most of the suffering across the globe. Capitalism is an economic system where profit lies at its core. To ensure continuous profit, manufacturing companies have largely shifted production to places where they can extract resources and exploit labor in the cheapest way possible, creating extreme global injustice where colonized countries are kept in a subordinate position as the fruit of their labor is enjoyed by wealthy nations. Capitalism causes widespread suffering by relying upon global conflicts, wars, to gain access to cheap labor, markets, geopolitical influence, and natural resources. Endless growth is also inherently unsustainable because it requires the continuous extraction of raw materials, relying on fossil fuel energy, and the mass disposal of waste, contributing to climate change on a mass scale. This has led to a world system in which 2/3 of humanity will not have the ecological space for survival, neither land or food or water. All these factors are accumulating into millions of people displaced across the globe and drowning in the sea. Globally, there is enough food to feed the entire world population, yet there are 815 million hungry people in the world, and 1/3 of all food is wasted. In a capitalist system, food is not produced to feed people. It is a commodity bought and sold to make a profit. If a profit can't be made, the food is not redistributed, but destroyed. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Our capitalist system is essentially a form of social murder. People dying because of climate change is a form of social murder. People dying because they can't afford food is a form of social murder. People dying in mines, mining for resources in the Congo for us to enjoy in the developed world is a form of social murder. People dying because they're terminally ill and can't afford rent anymore is a form of social murder. Across the globe, most people's lives are hard, brutal, unjust, and short, thanks mainly to this capitalist system. These are not bugs to the system, they are inherent to it. Yet, despite all of this, most religious and spiritual people profess to be completely apolitical, or they say that religion and politics and spirituality are completely separate, or they're simply working as a weapon for the reproduction of the status quo. And yet, at the same time, most religious and spiritual teaching profess things like loving your neighbor and cultivating inner peace and generosity and compassion and gratitude and self-restraint. But is inner peace alone appropriate when we hear about indigenous people displaced from their land so that companies could gain access to oil? Is acceptance of our fate the right way to go when yet more concentration camps, electric fences, and attempts to cross the border are killing thousands of refugees? Is it really right to feel gratitude for our privilege when that privilege is built off of historical slavery, colonization, and contemporary exploitation and enslavement of workers in factories whose cheap labor we guarantee? What does it mean to love your neighbor whilst supporting systems that crush, exploit, and dehumanize them? How can we command people to suffer in patience that is patiently allowing the extraction of the wealth from the poor to the rich? How can we tell the workers not to revolt, but to simply submit to the oppression of the system that is killing millions of defenseless people Should we really be bearing poverty and oppression with humility and patience, and be viewing wealth as divine blessing, whilst 1% of the population owns as much wealth as the bottom 50%? How can we feel self-gratification and moral superiority for living frugally, whilst passively accepting a system based on relentless growth and consumerism? How can we preach inherent value of all beings and sit back and watch as policing and militarized violence is used to destroy the well-being of whole populations deemed expendable and disposable, and fragment and suppress any coherent anti-wealth political movement such as Occupy? All of these spiritual values are in part political questions, and the same applies to the oppression of women and the LGBTQ+ community, and to animals, and other violations against the fellow beings with whom we share this earth. And we have to seriously confront all of these things if we're going to take our spiritual life seriously. There's absolutely nothing apolitical about getting us to accept these injustices with grace and humility and peace. Getting people to accept these values is a form of political propaganda. The glaring contradictions between the values of a lot of political and religious people and their actions is something that I think we all should be reflecting on. But even if we completely reject all of these things as spiritual questions, wasn't Moses concerned with the political when he led the Hebrews out of bondage? Was Jesus not concerned with the political when he sat with prostitutes and lepers? Keeping the company of the outcast and the downtrodden, he lived among and taught the people, ministered to those in need. When he told rich men to sell all their possessions and give it to the poor. When he said it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? Was the Jewish theologian Rabbi Heschel not political when he said that he couldn't open his prayer book because every time he did, he saw the children of Vietnam burning in napalm? Was the Muhammad of Arabia not deeply concerned with the political when he overthrew the Arab tribal bonds and insisted that all human beings stood radically equal like teeth in a comb? Was Martin Luther King not political when he said that our task was to save the soul of America from militarism and racism and materialism? In all of these cases, their deep spirituality and religion didn't stop them from standing up against war and injustice and poverty and suffering. Is it not deeply political when all across the globe, among Christians and Hindus and Muslims and Jews, sectarian religious leaders scour religious texts to condemn the things that they do not like taxes and tolerance and people's political and religious choices? Is it not political that the enormous riches piled up by many religious institutions come from the exploitation of the labor of millions of people, which ensures the continued existence of the religious institutions? Capitalism is beholden to its own cleric of economists and managers. The people at the top in these institutions, no less than the capitalist class, often live on the backs of the people, profit from their degradation and the ignorance and the oppression of the people. Is it not profoundly political that presidential candidates are justified through religious language and using religious language to attract voters? Is it not profoundly political that many of the world's worst historical injustices were justified through religious and spiritual language? From Nazi Germany to slavery in the US, to colonization of countries across the globe, to Christianizing indigenous communities, to wars and violence and suffering were justified through religious and spiritual language. As my good friends Javi and James say in their videos, there is no such thing as being apolitical. Behind our materialist capitalist society stands the indescribable anguish of billions of our fellow beings. We cannot be mindful and compassionate and value the divine in every human being without an understanding and a response to the political realities that encompass our lives. To deny the reality of gender and race and class struggles is in reality taking a position in favor of the status quo, in favor of the current system. No matter how apolitical you profess to be, The positions that you take, such as loving your neighbour and peace and low consumption and equality, are inherently opposed to our capitalist system and opposed to unfettered growth and to borders and injustice. If we are part of and support a social order that is inherently unjust, how much spiritual and religious development and liberation is really possible for us? Even if you completely reject that spirituality and religion are in any way political, I think there's no way in which you can deny that capitalism has become a new religion across the globe. The religion of capitalism meets the needs of its devotees by manipulating people into believing that it can bring about their quest for freedom, by promising to satisfy worries, anguish, and alleviate the world from poverty, and getting people to believe that their desires can be met through purchasing particular commodities. Capitalism has an autonomous, godlike existence and is the source of all hopes. Money occupies the role of divinities. It is considered the highest good and the focus of faith. We sacrifice our forests, our land, our people on the altar of the market. Some corporations, such as Coca-Cola and McDonald's, claim that their trademarks are now more globally recognized symbols than even the Christian cross. Like a missionary project, very few places are immune from the experience of capitalism and Western cultural imperialism. Just like a religion, there's an abundance of historical and contemporary figures that we look to for inspiration and stories to give meaning to our existence under capitalism. Celebrities have been raised to the status of demigods, eligible for worship, and have the status of a sacred personality in our capitalist system. People within corporations such as Richard Branson, Alan Sugar, Bill Gates, Trump are sanctified as 21st century saints. Capitalism has its own iconography of advertising and public relations. Brands have become religions with a belief system and an ethos, making them effective and efficient, ensuring people are indoctrinated with a loyalty to a brand. It is not the object that we buy the ideology of the advertisement. Shopping malls have become the new altars for worshipping the god of money. Just like a religion, capitalism has a growing body of literature to accompany it, like Think and Grow Rich, The Wealth of Nations, which presents the idea of the invisible hand of the market. Workplaces increasingly incorporate religious language and values by imbuing work with a sense of virtue and salvation through work, encouraging a deeply serious and conscientious attitude towards work, which shows how capitalism itself has actually attempted to develop sacred qualities around the process of work. The media are the choir of capitalism, singing the hymn of consumerism. Marketing and advertising are the priests of capitalism, and market laws are ascribed the traditional characteristics of God. Capitalism even has some element of monistic organizations. Corporations increasingly offer beds with offices, meditation and yoga rooms for employees. We worship money, with banks being bigger than cathedrals, and headquarters of multinational companies are bigger than mosques and synagogues. Capitalism has its own political theology, a view of history and politics that is premised on the inevitability of the capitalist system spreading across the world. Whilst evangelical people try to convert society to Christianity, today, the capitalist system attempts to convert people into entrepreneurs that can contribute more to the market. Just like religion, capitalism is imbued with superstitions, from belief in meritocracy, the belief in the economic benefits of multinational institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, the belief that relentless economic growth is good for society, and that bankers are job creators, and the belief that austerity works. Capitalism, in other words, is the New World religion. It's the first truly global religion, binding all people across the globe in a set of values and worldview. So, given the power of capitalism as a truly world religion, I do not think that changing our individual consciousnesses, even on a mass global scale, will be enough on its own to change the outcomes of our material reality without significantly overhauling our current capitalist system. Even if you completely reject everything that I've said so far, I think that we can't deny that the values of capitalism, like greed and competition and individualism, completely contradict the values of spirituality, such as generativity and altruism and benevolence. Research has shown that people who embrace the ethos of capitalism are less likely to act generously, are less likely to act in ways that are beneficial to the community or to society. They engage in fewer pro-social and more anti-social activities, are more likely to treat others in more competitive and less cooperative ways. They're more likely to objectify those around them. It leads to political and social disengagement, diversion, distraction, loneliness, alienation from family and community that gives substance and meaning to life. Separating us from the production of the products that we consume leads us to diminish the spirituality inherent in preparing and using the objects that sustain and enhance life and living. We are made into transactional beings who reduce each other's vital humanity to tools by which we value short-term profit. Past meeting basic needs for survival, wealth does not increase happiness, and regardless of how affluent you are, the competition over what you have achieved ensures feelings of material insecurity. Concern for wealth and possession conflicts with working to improve the world through activism or generativity, having satisfying relationships with family and friends. Research suggests that happiness involves a move away from the self-interested, competitive values and goals encouraged by capitalism, and a move towards values advocated by spirituality, such as altruism and community feeling and generative values. Taken together, all of these factors indicate that the values inherent in capitalism's ethos undermine and oppose those values that are inherent in spirituality. The thing that makes capitalism so dangerous is that it corrodes the communal values it needs to restrain its excesses. For spiritual and religious people, we need to ask ourselves, how can we be okay with the system that is trying to destroy the very thing that we hold sacred? Even if you deny that capitalism has negative consequences psychologically, we can't deny that capitalism has become big business, commodified, marketized, and sold to accommodate people to capitalist reality and values. A workshop here, a book there, a retreat there. New Age religion insists that by thinking positive thoughts, we create positive vibrations which elicit the universe's help in inviting health and wealth into our lives. The idea that salvation lies in work and materialism, the view of work as a noble spiritual calling, is held at some of the most successful corporations in the world and is crucial for a healthy capitalist ecosystem. It encourages a deeply serious and conscientious attitude towards work. We are enthralled by the promise of personal fulfillment with self-help, financial counseling, spiritual enlightenment. These individualistic forms of spirituality deny community and solidarity. I won't go into this too much because Angie Speaks has an awesome video on this that I will link in the description box below. As I was saying earlier, given the psychological and social impacts of capitalism, I do not think that simply getting people to change their individual consciousnesses, even on a mass scale, will on its own be enough to change the outcomes of our material reality without a complete overhaul of our capitalist system. Just to be completely clear, I'm not saying that absolutely any attempts to change ourselves are futile and won't change anything. I actually believe incredibly deeply in doing the internal work to unpack and understand the ways in which our hearts and minds have been colonized by systems like patriarchy and capitalism. And when I talk about religion and spirituality as political, I'm definitely not advocating for us to reintegrate religion into the state. But I think we have to understand that there's nothing apolitical about spiritual and religious values. In every campaign, in every election, in every decision we make to engage or to disengage, we are deciding the fate of millions of people, the fate of our earth, and the fate of humanity. What moves us towards equality and justice, that's what we have to fight for. We have to fight for the people subjugated, the LGBTQ+ community, refugees, racial injustices. We have to fight against people being displaced from their land for oil. We have to fight for the children who might not have a future on this planet anymore. We have to fight against the ravaging of the land. We have to fight for the most marginalized people on the globe. We have to fight for the just distribution of food and water and goods across the globe. We have to understand that advocating for spiritual values goes hand in hand with fighting for the liberation of those who are oppressed. And part of this liberation involves understanding and unpacking the ways in which our capitalist system causes the destruction of the planet and causes billions of people to be enslaved and to be exploited. The systems that so many of us benefit from are just too unjust, too unfair, and too oppressive for us to just sit back and not do anything. The suffering on this earth is just too great for us to have the privilege of distracting ourselves through arguing about theological and spiritual differences. This isn't just an occasion for prayer or charity or spouting social harmony or healing the sick whilst ignoring the social conditions that promote disease, or simply standing with respect to the marginalized. We need to take action to alter and influence these systems, and we need to organize those people who are already conscious of these injustices, and we need to fiercely condemn those people who are causing this injustice. The real struggle isn't between Christianity and Islam or Buddhism and Hinduism. The real struggle is between the world's disenfranchised people and the materialist religiosity of the world's elite. The power of capitalism as a new world religion is so strong and so powerful that it is not enough for us to simply advocate for individual changes in our consciousness and advocate for spiritual values whilst completely ignoring the material conditions that lead to the subjugation and oppression of millions of beings on this earth. We need a fundamental overhaul in our capitalist system. Capitalism as the new world religion is far too powerful and far too strong for us to simply advocate for changes in our individual consciousness, because on its own it's not going to be enough to change the material reality that we live in that is causing the indescribable anguish of billions of people on our earth and the destruction of our entire planet. We need to recognize that we need to fundamentally overhaul our capitalist system if we have any hope of survival. In my next video, I really want to talk about the fact that we on the left have a lot to learn from spiritual practices and values. And just as I believe that changes in our individual consciousness on its own isn't going to be enough, at the same time, I also don't believe that simply changing our material reality will be enough to bring about a fundamentally different society. I think we also need to be thinking about spiritual values and practices. For more information on all of the things that I've discussed today, I would highly recommend checking out Damon Garcia's YouTube channel, Captain Haywire's YouTube channel, and Angie Speaks, as they have great content around leftism and spirituality. I would really recommend that everyone goes and checks out James C. Finley's website, where he has poetry and writing and videos and other things that he has created, as he has done such a great job at editing this video for me. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, and I'd really appreciate it if you would consider becoming a Patreon or making a one-time donation via Ko-fi or PayPal. It would really help me to continue to make these videos.